Rod Freeman here again with continuation of my story, One-Way Ticket, about my 2.5 years hitchhiking adventure, traveling different places in the world. This is chapter 5 and it's called Istanbul to Afghanistan. And the last chapter, chapter 4, I was on the train when we left that. I was on the train heading for Istanbul, playing my harp. So we're starting out chapter 5, arrival in Istanbul at the train station. Okay, so coming on the Orient Express, basically, is the Orient Express there. Coming in the old ancient train station, you can see that in some of the Agatha Christie movies and stuff. And I immediately headed to the most famous district in Istanbul, the old town, called the Sultanahmet district. And this is where the cheap hotels, which I got one right away, nice little flophouse with a bathroom down the hall, and started exploring around. And this is like the old town, the old city of Istanbul, where all the Blue Mosque, the most magnificent mosque in the world, or one of them for sure. And Istanbul is one of the most remarkable and magnificent cities on the face of the earth. And everyone should go there just to absorb its beauty and its history. And it's called Istanbul now, but before that it was the famous Constantinople. For like 1,000 years, it was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. When the Roman Empire things were getting too hot in Rome, and they moved the capital out to Constantinople, named after Constantine, one of the Roman emperors that embraced Christianity. And it was different than the regular Roman Empire, the old one, because it was Christian and they spoke Greek. They didn't speak Latin. And it was a different capital. It was a different scene. But it was the continuation of the Roman Empire. For 1,000 years, it was Constantinople until the Turks came in 1453 and overthrew the Christian patriarchs of Constantinople, where they sat on the peacock throne. They had to move from, the Christians had to move out and the Muslims moved in. The Turks are religion of Islam, and that's where the beautiful mosques come from. And by the way, the throne of the patriarch of the it's called the Greek Russian Orthodox Church, or Eastern Orthodox Church. It's just as old as the Catholic Church and just as big a deal, pretty much. And it moved up into Moscow, which it still is there. It had a brief hiatus when the communists got rid of it for a while, but it's back now. And so I'm in the place where that had its birth, the Eastern Orthodox Church. But now it's Islam and mosques all over the place. But there is one of the most famous churches in history, and it's there, and it's called the Hagia. I have to look how to pronounce it. Hagia Sophia. I always call it Hagia Sophia because that's how it's spelled, Hagia. The Hagia Sophia, which is one of the most famous churches in all of Christendom, and it was built by Justinian, one of the early emperors, one of the most famous, probably, emperors of the Eastern Roman Empire. And he built that thing in late 600s, I believe, and it's still there. It's got one of the hugest domes, and they turned it into a mosque for a while, but now it is a museum. And speaking of museums, on that same district, in the Sultanahmet district, there is the Topkapi Museum, and it's just one of the most fabulous museums in the world, where I saw St. John's hand. Like the Christians really into relics, like you might have the tongue of St. Andrew in your church or something. Actually, I think I saw that in Italy. The tongue of St. Andrew, that would be a relic. They call it a relic, and it makes your church more holy or something. There's a whole underground market in relics in the Middle Ages. But anyway, I saw his hand, and it was in an iron glove that someone had fashioned, but you could look inside the glove. There's a piece cut out where you could see the mummified remains of St. John's hand, there. Also, I saw emeralds and rubies, like huge and big hookahs the sultans smoked, and some of the outfits that the sultans and the harem girls hung out in and stuff. It's really quite a wonderful museum. And the covered market is there, where there's about anything you want, you can find in the covered market, the famous covered market of Istanbul. I was kind of looking around for puzzle rings because all the hippies had puzzle rings, but I don't think I didn't buy one. I think someone finally gave me one, I think. Anyway, I watched them make antiques and stuff there. It was pretty cool. And there's just a wonderful spot, you know, in the old town, all the old buildings and stuff. But dominating the sky was the Blue Mosque, which is just this fabulous, incredible mosque. I actually got to go in it. They allowed you to go in it in between prayer times and stuff back then. Okay, so I'm settled into Istanbul, and I'm on my way. I'm going to head out to the east. But first, I've got to go to American Express and see if there's any letters from home. And so I go across the Glatia Bridge, which crosses the Golden Horn, they call it. Istanbul not only is one of the most remarkable cities in the world because of its history, but its geography is just incredible. It's right on this huge channel called the Bosphorus, and it's a major shipping channel between the Black Sea to the north and the Mediterranean to the south. Everything has to go through there. So one part of Istanbul is on the west side, one part's on the east side, so it's like the gateway to Asia. One's in Europe, one side's in Europe on the west, and on the east side you're in Asia. And this is where Alexander the Great, you know, solved the riddle of the Gordian knot, because there's this myth that there's this big macrame knot there that, you know, it said whoever solves the riddle of this knot and unties it will conquer Asia, you know. Well, Alexander the Great went in and looked at it and took his axe out or sword out and chopped the thing in two, and then he promptly conquered Asia. But that's where that was, you know. I mean, it's the entryway to Asia, and also this wonderful port. And so you have the Bosphorus, the channel there, and then off of it, splitting West Istanbul in two, is the Golden Horn, which is like a channel that goes up, and there's a bridge across it, and a couple of three bridges. I take the Glatia Bridge, which I really like because they had pretzels with sesame seeds on it. And I went over to the new city, the modern city, where the Hilton was and where the American Express was, and picked up my mail, and I did get a letter from my mom. Okay, well, that was great. So I went and got a cup of Turkish coffee and sat down and opened the letter to my mom. From my mom, she gave me some news, but the big thing was that really freaked me out was she informed me in the letter that I had received from the draft board a 1Y classification. Now, that was an important thing, and if you looked at my second video I did, I talked all about this, my trouble with the draft. When I quit college and decided I wanted to go out and learn something by traveling instead of sitting in classrooms, I had to deal with the draft because everyone was going to Vietnam, you know. If they weren't in college or had some other deferment. Well, the 1Y deferment was because I'd sent some stuff about my allergies there. They had classified me 1A, you know, a few months before that, but now I'm 1Y. But she didn't include the little piece of paper, you know. Well, okay, so I'm a real skeptical kind of person, and you had to know what kind of times it was. Okay, it's middle of May 1970, okay. The Vietnam War was raging. There was a freaking outright revolution going on in the United States. Kent State had just happened, the Kent State massacre, where the National Guard fired on all these young protesters, student hippie type protesters, killed 4 young people. Neil Young wrote a famous song about it. There were banks of Americas being blown up, power stations being blown up. The Weather Underground was a radical, violent, kind of Bolshevik-like, you know, organization, extreme left wing, and they were conducting war. There was the trial of Chicago 7. Just before I left, there was a murder in Chicago. The police walked into the Black Panther's apartment where Fred Hampton was, and just murdered these guys. The cops just walked in and killed these guys without a trial. This is kind of stuff that was going on, and it had been going on. There was huge protests all over the campuses, all over the country. Radical, militant, violent, anti-war groups. Anti-war and violent. To me, see, that's why I was over saying peace and love, because I'm kind of a pacifist on that way. Anyway, so that's what's going on, okay? And my dad is totally on the other side of me. He's like a veteran, and he wants me to go in the military, and he's got some influence over my mom. So I'm wondering, did my dad tell my mom to tell me I've got a 1Y so that I'll just not worry about coming back to the States, and then they can bust me? And because people are getting busted and thrown in jail for being draft dodgers, and I was technically, as far as I knew, a draft dodger. although I tried to get out, medical technicality. Well, now apparently I've got this one why. Well, okay, so that's another chapter in my dealing with the draft. And I promised we'd kind of get back to that after I talked about it in one of my earlier videos. So here we are back to it. Well, I'm leaving in suspense here because I just told my mom, I said, well, why don't you send me that classification in the mail? My next address will be Rawalpindi, Pakistan. Okay, so that's what I wrote back to my mom, and so I had to be proven. I didn't even trust my own mother. That's how bad things were as far as politically in the United States and all over the world too. Like, it wasn't really a good idea to be advertised that you were American. I usually went as like Canadian or British or something like that, because even back then, except in like Italy where we liberated the people in World War II, they love Americans, but anyway. So that was going on. Okay, so I go back to Sultanahmet district in my hotel, and I'm looking for a way to get out east. And so I go to the pudding shop and look at the bulletin board of the pudding shop. The pudding shop is like one of those famous places, that you hear about miles away. Like before you ever get there, you've heard about the pudding shop. You've been talking to people in Istanbul. And that's where, people, young hippies and people on the road traveling with your backpacks, you meet, you talk with each other and get information. Well, there's a bulletin board there, and I found this thing. These people in a Volkswagen van were going to Afghanistan, which is the way to India, man, on the hippie trail, and they had a Volkswagen van, and they were looking for riders, $50. So yeah, that's where I'm going. So I contacted these people, had a bowl of pudding, at the pudding shop, and I think the next day we took off in this Volkswagen van, and there were probably about 5 or 6 of us hippies in there, and traveling out to Afghanistan. And it was a long trip and a lot of days. I can hardly remember it anyway. I remember in eastern Turkey, there's this guy, it was near Mount Ararat, if you know what that is. But this guy was there, he was trying to sell me a piece of Noah's Ark that he'd found. Mount Ararat, well, okay. So anyway, we went on and we ended up in Iran, in Persia. That's ancient Persia, but now we call it Iran. And it was a weird country, it's on the Aryan Plateau, so there's a lot of desert, or the Iranian Plateau they call it. And it's this huge kind of flat, very high elevation plateau that goes from Turkey, eastern Turkey, all the way across to through Afghanistan. It's this very high elevation area. It's cold in the winter, hot in the summer. It was summer. And we were hot, and we were cruising along in the Volkswagen van, and I'm curled up in the back deck above the engine, kind of half dreaming, half asleep, and bumping along on the road, And down in the engine compartment, I've been hearing this kind of bad sound for quite a while. I mentioned it to the guys, and then anyway, I listened to the transmission blow up. They dropped the tranny right in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere. Okay, so we all get out. Who knows how long it's going to take to get the parts, probably need a whole transaxle, the Volkswagens. And so the first bus that came by, I flagged it down and jumped ship. I said, see you guys later. And traveled on to Tehran, which had a really weird vibe because it was a real American-like, because the United States, Iran was a puppet government of the United States, and we had actually in 1953, the CIA, along with MI5, the British, had overthrown the democratically elected government of Iran in 1953. Mossadegh, he was overthrown, got rid of, and we put in this royal guy, the Shah of Iran, who was still in charge there, and then we trained this Nazi-like police force called SAVAK that were really nasty dudes. So all the police there, they were really, really nasty. And so I got a hotel room and stayed there a few days, and all I did was get stoned, and we kind of wandered around the city. It was, you could get a pizza and a beer there and stuff. But I didn't do that because I was on a budget. But it was real Americanized and real secular, and they finally overthrew the Shah in '79. And anyway, that's another story. But so I kind of wanted to move on, so I did. And I got out of there and headed to the next country, Afghanistan. Okay, so I've tried to hitchhike. I think I did hitchhike okay, but when I got to the border's kind of weird because these countries, they've got a border and then they've got like a no man's land, and you got to go through to get to the interport of the next country. So this is sort of no man's land, and you can't take the bus from either one. There's mini buses that go across like the 10 miles of like no man's land, you know, like the buffer zone between these two countries. So anyway, so I got in a minivan, but it's a bunch of Pakistanis who are always in a hurry, you know, they're always dressed in their suits, you know, and they're smuggling diamonds and stuff back and forth. Anyway, a bunch of Pakistanis going to Afghanistan, through Afghanistan, probably just going to Pakistan. Because Afghanistan, there's really no trains in Afghanistan. They're one of the poorest countries on earth. That's why the United States attacked them. It was porous, but we can't even beat them, you know. But anyway, so we got to the border, the Afghan border, and they let us out, and I could see up ahead the guard station. And it's this little like freaking like 20 by 10 or 20 by 15 foot building, single story, really old, with no windows in it. The windows were gone, the door was gone. You could see the guys inside. The Pakistanis all run up there and they all get their passports stamped and they get through, you know. And I'm kind of sauntering up, taking up the rear end there. So I'm the last guy through. I go up to the building and I look, there's a guy inside at a desk, a big wooden desk. And so I enter through the door, and he's smiling, and he's got a big mustache. And I notice there's a young Afghani guy with a gun over his shoulder standing there sweltering in, it must have been like a World War I French outfit or something, a wool, you know. And Afghanistan is a trip. Very poor country. And I look at the guy at the desk, and I got my passport out, you know, and I put it down on his desk. He says, "Thank you." He goes, "Welcome to Afghanistan." Stomp. He stamps my passport, and he says, "Would you like to smoke some hash?" You know, and I'm like, "What?" You know, this guy's the border official. He's asking me if I want to smoke some hash. What's going on here? I'm surprised. Look at my face. He look on my face, and he opens his drawer, and he starts pulling out these chunks of hash. And he said, "Yes, many people, when they go to Iran, they don't want to take the hash there. They're afraid of, you know, being caught. So they leave me, and I've got all this hash, you know, help me out." You know, so I'm like, sure, okay, you know, what the heck, might as well try it, you know. And so he got some, he went out back, we went out back and got smoked out with the guy that stamped my passport. The little guard guy, he didn't give a damn. He was just sitting there sweltering. I don't know what it was, just must have been thinking about something weird. Anyway, so this guy, the border guy, we exchanged names. His name was Mustafa, and I'm Rod, there comes the Rod. And he taught me my first two words of Afghani, which was charas, which is hash. And they do it the same way everybody does. You kind of heat it up, you know, and mash it up in some tobacco. And they smoke it in this thing called a chillum, which is just like a little cone, a ceramic cone, big at one end. You put a little rock in it to kind of keep the stuff from going through, and you mix the tobacco, you mash it up with the hash, you put that in there, you wrap a wet rag around the bottom of the little cone, and you hold it in your hands, and you kind of, it's sticking out, you know, and somebody lights it, and you smoke it, and you make kind of a stem, and it's very cool because the wet rag cools it down and stuff. And so we got smoked out, and so charas, and the other word he taught me was hobas, and that means good. So I learned good and hash from this guy, the guy that stamped my passport. So that was a very remarkable story, and it's absolutely true. I swear to God, that's what happened. And later, when I came back through, like 2 or 3 months later, he remembered my name. I remembered his name, Mustafa. And we didn't get smoked because there were a bunch of other people there, but I went through Mustafa, man, you know. Afghani people are just wonderful, beautiful people. It's too bad that they've suffered so many problems with the Russians bombing the crap out of them, and then we bombed the pieces of the United States, you know. We're still there, but helping the poppy fields grow. And Anyway, that's another story. But so I moved on and caught a bus into Herat, which is the first kind of city you run into in Afghanistan. Very old, poor city. It's like going into the freaking Old West. The guys are on horses and stuff. They ride horses around. You know, they don't have cars. They can't afford them. You know, they have their old guns, and they're all gunsmiths. You know, and they're really men, you know, with beards and turbans and ride horses, and you know, they're manly men, and they work hard, you know, in the fields growing opium or hashish or whatever. It's the best hash country in the world. It's known all over on the hippie trail. Everyone knew that the best hash was Afghanistan. That's probably why I was there, being a budding hippie there and having to, you know, take all those drugs that the hippies were supposed to take, you know, and. That's an interesting part of my generation, sidelight there. A lot of people aren't around because of that, but we'll get more into that as we get into Afghanistan. Okay, so Herat, I remember I bought a really cool, like charm, lucky charm I called it, and I saw this beautiful ancient mosque. It's like really old, and like I should know the name of it. It's like some famous thing. And anyway, so I moved from Herat. The next, you could take the bus down to Kandahar, of course the bus, you know, with all the Afghani people, you know, the women, you know, and the women there, we call them the Cape Crusaders, you know, because they wear this burqa thing, and it just, where in other Muslim countries, you know, they'll wear a veil like in Morocco or something, the women will just have like a veil thing. Here it's like a whole hooded thing. You can't see any, even their eyes, you know, and they do this kind of macrame thing, a little mesh where they can see out, but you can't see in. And sometimes you see their hands, and they're usually all, the old women are all stained with henna, you know, because they work hard and they're dyeing things and using henna in their hair. All the old men, when their beards turn gray, they dye it with henna, so these guys have these flaming, it looks like flames coming out of their head, their face, you know, these bright orange beards and stuff. They usually shave their heads and wear turbans. A lot of black turbans, interesting, in Afghanistan. They wear kind of robe-like clothes, real loose-fitting clothes, really comfortable clothing, and the women, of course, are totally covered with their burqa. Now, in the cities, like in when I got to Kabul, which is more of a modern city, or Kandahar had even a modern kind of quarter, you see girls wearing, you know, mini skirts and nylons or whatever they were wearing back then, you know, and like, you know, twiggy hairdos and Sophia Loren hairdos or whatever, in the modern part. But in the country and in the old parts, people are very traditional, very much follow the 5 pillars of Islam. Anyway, I got to Kandahar and I visited the pottery section of town. It's like a big pottery center town, and I watched this. One of the most interesting experiences I'll never forget was watching this potter. This guy, he was the best potter I have ever seen in my life. He was on a pottery wheel, and he was throwing from the hump, if you know what that means. That means you get your pottery wheel, and they weren't electric. You know, this is a primitive place like the Old West. The guy's kicking it with his leg, and his kicking leg is like freaking Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know, just this huge muscular mass, and his other leg was like normal. It's a really lopsided dude, but he was a potter, and he kicked that wheel around, and he'd throw from the hump. He threw like a huge chunk of clay, and he'd throw like 5 or 6 vases out of that one thing. You know, it's like a mass production dude, and he could raise up a you know, a pot, like a, you know, 12, 14 inch high pot in just no time. I mean, he was just the greatest, and I'd taken classes in pottery and tried to do it myself, and, you know, like flopped it quite a few times. I finally made a pot, I remember, but this guy was just insanely good, and he just bring that thing up, he'd shape it perfect, you know, he'd have a little tool and he'd dink around with it, and then he'd put the skids on, he'd put the brake on the wheel, and he'd grab a chunk of clay and he'd fashion a handle in like 3 seconds, you know. And in the last turn, he'd set the handle down, and he'd, as the last turn of the pot, he'd like do this thing with his fingers and just do this cool decoration thing on the side in the last turn, you know, and then he'd take his finger and he'd whack the top of it, make the spout, and he'd take this handle and he'd stick it on there, put a little bit of water, stick it on there in about 5 seconds, boom, it's on, and he'd take a wire, cut it off the top of the hump, put it over with the other vessels. He had a whole ton of them. He'd been working on them all morning. And he'd start and do the next one, and he could put out a pot probably about every 3 to 5 minutes. That was amazing character. And I remember after he'd done a few, he stopped. He noticed me watching him, you know, and so he motioned to come over, and he got out some hash, and we got stoned. Charas Kobas, you know, the guy, oh, you thought that was cool because I knew the 2 words, you know. The border guy really gave me the key to Afghanistan. Anyway, Kandahar was awesome. And they had these huge beehive kilns. They had fire up. Some were ruined, you know, and some were brand new, you know. They're like, oh, probably like 24 of them in this area. It was like this huge pottery works. Really cool place. Like I say, the Old West. And we got on the old bus and headed up to Kabul. And Kabul was the biggest city, the capital of Afghanistan, and where the King's Palace is. And there's a hotel downtown I was told about. I got a room there, but when I went up there, the bed, I opened the thing, the bugs were like crawling out of the bed, so I was looking for another place. But the cool thing about this cafe, hotel, right in downtown, Old Town Kabul, was they had the best food. They had like a roast. They do this big beef roast, you know, every night, and it was like meat and baked potatoes, you know, sour cream they had, you know, it's like a real Western meal, which is hard to find out there. Find a lot of kebab and bread, you know, like flat unleavened bread and stuff, and vegetables and rice, you know, a lot of rice and vegetables and beans and stuff. But this was a real treat, and it was dirt cheap too, so inexpensive. So, and then I found another place, and this was really inexpensive. It was sort of on the outskirts of town, and walking around that town was just like I say, it's like being in the frontier, only no bars, you know. They had the tea shops instead, where they sit around and smoke chillum, you know, smoke the water pipe, you know, and drink tea, you know. They were really big on tea, but no alcohol at all. And they were pretty strict there, and I didn't see any bars at all, even in the newer town, but I wasn't looking either. Anyway, I got a really inexpensive place. It was a big room, like a sleeping porch. There were like all these cots in there. I got a cot for like 50 cents a night. And there, some interesting people there. All along the hippie trail too, this tragedy was kind of going on, because even really from Spain all the way out to India, in the pharmacies you could buy methamphetamines or morphine just right over the counter. So a lot of junkies were out there. Luckily I never got into that, but there were so many Western hippie, especially seemed like a lot of Europeans who were into the needle out there, and you could go in the pharmacy, you could get your morphine for like 10 cents a hit, okay, and you know, so there's this Canadian guy, everybody loved him, Mojo, you know, and Mojo is this kind of, had the whitest skin and real dark, curly, black hair and blue eyes. He's from Montreal, and he was the junkie, and they'd shoot up, and he'd jump out of his cot and run across and barf out the window, because, you know, that's what the junkies do, you know. It's such a rush that it makes you throw up, and then, whoa, he was in seventh heaven, you know, for a while. And we'd hang out and stuff. And then there was an English girl next to me, and I remember she was really ill. A lot of people get sick out there. In fact, I ended up getting something. I'll get to that later. Anyway, while I was there, I had an acid trip of my life. And I'd only taken acid maybe twice before. I remember once some Purple Haze back in '68 at the Sky River Rock Festival, which was in the Northwest. It was a rock festival a whole year before Woodstock, a 3-day rock festival. So we were first in the Northwest there before Woodstock. And this girl I knew from San Francisco, my taco honey, gave me a hit of that. And then I'd taken some Orange Sunshine, really powerful hit of Orange Sunshine. So I was expanding my consciousness and opening my doors of perception, which was quite popular back then. And it still is, I find out too, that psychedelics are still around. Although I don't do much anymore. Anyway, somebody gave me a hit of acid, okay, and it was kind of crumbly, it didn't really look good, but I tried it, you know, and I was sitting around, nothing happened, you know, so I'm like, kind of disappointed. Well, upstairs of the sleeping porch, there was like a really nice apartment where some big dealers from, again, Canadians, some big Canadian dealers lived up there, I heard. So I thought, well, big Canadian dealers, you know, they might have some assets. Here I was going to put aside this time to take a trip, and this stuff didn't do me. So, okay. So I go upstairs, I knock on the door, and this guy comes, and he's like, man, he's like decked out in the place like incense, you know, comes out, you can see the lights, the dark and mellow, you know, orange and warm lights in there, and all the beads and curtains, and, you know, like this freaking wonderland going on in there, and rich hippie dealers back in the 70s in Afghanistan, you know. And I said, hey man, you know, some guy gave me a hit of acid, I took it, and didn't do anything. I was really looking forward to an acid trip. You wouldn't have any acid, I could just buy a little chunk from you or something. He goes, oh wait, just a minute. We didn't invite me in. I think the chicks were in there. But he goes and comes back, and he's got this like big tab. It's like a little smaller than an Alka-Seltzer. And he gives it to me, he goes, this is a Sandoz Space Tab. And I'm going, Sandoz, you know, that's got a big name. That's like this Swiss company that makes clinical acid, you know, LSD. And I looked at it, and it was like a little smaller than Alka-Seltzer. It had the Superman stamp on it, and it had like this spiral sort of rainbow coming out from the middle, kind of like Easter egg dye kind of stuff. It looked like in this pill, you know. I went, holy cow. He says, yeah, nobody here wants it. You know, we've had it for a while. Somebody gave it to us in Europe, you know, and you can have it, you know. I went, oh, thanks a lot. Wow, okay. So I walked off and popped it and ate the thing, you know. Later I found out it was a 10-way hit. Well, I found out pretty quick, really, that it was a pretty powerful chunk, because I went down and sat in my bunk. I remember I sat up on my bunk, because that's what I had. I had my pack under my bunk, and my bunk there. I had my little table with my, you know, candle and stuff on it. And somebody passed me a joint. I took a hit of the joint and passed it on, and all of a sudden, whack! Just reality totally changed. I was no longer there. Okay, I was in a big, fancy room with crystal chandeliers and lace curtains and all these tables laid out with all this food and drink and stuff. A big empty room and big huge doors on the end, and I could see out the windows there's sort of rolling green hill all around, okay? And I'm like, whoa, what am I doing here? What's this? And all this food, you know, the smells are just awesome, you know? And all of a sudden I could see movement over the hill, and all these like people and cartoon characters are like coming over the hill. They start coming in the door. I mean, Donald Duck, Daffy Duck come in, you know, like Goofy, and freaking my mom and dad, you know, and everybody I'd ever known, you know, like whole high school class, and people I'd known in college, people I met others. Everybody comes in here and they're like, hey Rod, how's it going? I went, hi, you know. So we started partying down and drinking and eating and stuff. Really, this is what I remember anyway. And so that went on for a long time. Finally, everybody left. You know, all the food was gone, the booze was gone, the drinks were gone. Everybody left. Bye, Rod. See you later. They all took off over the hill. I'm standing there. All of a sudden, whack! I'm back sitting in the bunk in Afghanistan. I'm like, whoa, wow, that was a trip. You know, I never had any kind of experience like I had one out-of-body experience the first time I smoked pot in Seattle, but this is the only other time that actually happened. Completely out-of-body experience. And I'm kind of looking around and go, hey, you know, Mojo or whatever. And one of them says, hey, Rod's back. Rod's back. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm back? You know, they said, well, you've been sitting there for 3 days. You know, like, what? So that's probably why I'm still a little weird from that one. But everybody's glad to see I was back, and they just left me there. They said, you just went out, you know, so we just left you there. We're thinking some people wanted to call the authorities, but we just thought just let you sit there. So thank you for doing that, because I didn't wake up in a straitjacket somewhere, you know. Anyway, that was Afghanistan, Kabul. Oh, also there, hippies and drugs, man. I was a real druggie then, and still to a degree, but I bought a kilo of hash there, and it wasn't actually hash yet. it was, this guy had just come from Mazar Sharif, which was like the big hash place up north in Afghanistan. And a lot of people were traveling around there because there were these big Buddhas that I think the Taliban actually destroyed them. I should have gone and seen them while I could. That the Buddhists had built, they were like 600 years old or something. But he had gotten a couple kilos up there, and they were the stuff you make out of hash, which is just the little brackets, just the little super resinous bud, female buds, no leaves at all. And this is all compacted in about a 200-pound press. So it was this big brick about like this big, okay, I guess about that big. I feel like this shirt is appropriate for today. Of like hashing, but you had to press the hash yourself. That's why I got it, because it was like really cool, because I learned how to press hash, and you take you kind of break it off and it kind of fluff off, and you heat it up, put a little bit of water in your hand, just a little bit of water in your hand there. You heat it up in a flame until it just starts to expand and smoke. You put it in there and you start mashing it up. And you knead it kind of like bread. You do it in a circular thing. You can make fingers, you can make patties, hash. And so I had pre-hash, sort of, I don't know what you'd call it. I think there is a word for it in Afghani, but I don't know. Anyway, so I got that stuck in my pack, and I was ready to head on to go to India, man. And so I kind of looked at my chances. I heard that the borders going into Pakistan, since they were another Muslim country, was hardly anything at the border, so I wouldn't have to worry about the hash. I could throw it in the bottom of my pack and chances are I wouldn't get busted. But going into India, they said there was a psychic woman in India that would sit at the border, and if you had any weed or anything illegal on you, she could just look at you and tell from your aura or something, probably look at the expression on your face, but she could look at you and say, search that guy, and she was like right like 90% of the time. She was really psychic woman. So everybody was afraid of her, So I thought, well, I'll take this kilo into Pakistan and head up in the mountains, because it was summer, it was pretty hot out there. And so I thought, well, go up in the mountains. I don't have to go to the Himalayas. I'll go to the Hindu Kush mountains, because I heard it was really cool up this valley called Swat Valley. Okay, so I throw my hash in my pack and my jalaba from Morocco. And I bought a really cool shirt and a vest in Afghanistan, a really nice long, the shirts they wear almost come down to their knees. They're real loose fitting and comfortable. And a little Afghani vest, kind of like something I saw Jimi Hendrix wearing or something. But, and I headed out. And so that comes to the end of chapter 5. I'm moving into India now. And I'm going to go down the Khyber Pass, another extremely remarkable geographical feature on the world. And so I'm going to drop into India here off the plateau, drop down into the Indus Valley on the next chapter of my book, my storybook, One Way Ticket, my travels, 1970 and 71.